Welcome to the Disambiguation podcast, where each week we try to remove some of the confusion around AI and business automation by talking to experts across a broad spectrum of business use cases and the supporting technology. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. And if you're new to the show, we release a new episode every Friday. It's released as a podcast on all the major podcast platforms, as a video on YouTube. And we also post a transcript on the Arion Research blog if you want to drop by there and read it. I'm not 100% sure why you would, but it's available if you do. So in the show today, I'm excited to talk a lot about chatbots and intelligent chatbots, and of course that means we're talking about large language models and generative AI. And I'm joined today. I'm going to bring him in. I'm joined today by Tim Handorf. Tim, welcome. Tim is currently the co-founder of G2. It's a software marketplace, head of G2 Labs, and the executive chairman of Carrier Source, which is a startup that was started by one of the ex-employees of G2, and it's a really interesting marketplace around shipping. He served in several roles at G2, and I should say I worked for Tim for several years at G2. He was the CEO when I first joined, and then he went to run a acquisition that we made around G2 Track, and then prior to that, he was the VP of Product Management at Big Machines, a CPQ startup that was acquired by Oracle in 2012. So, welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here and excited to chat a little bit about chatbots.
Yeah, maybe we could have just had my bot call your bot, right? So tell a little bit about your role currently at G2, and then I'm really interested in the innovations that you've added to the site this year using generative AI.
Yeah, and so my co-founder Mike Wheeler and I run a group called G2 Labs, and we get the privilege of experimenting with all the new technologies that come up and ultimately trying to design and bring new products to market that will help buyers and sellers of software. Back in November, as many people kind of did, we had actually, prior to November, we had tried all kinds of interesting things with AI. AI is not new. We had tested machine learning, some natural language processing, mainly around trying to summarize the reviews on our marketplace. And frankly, the results were lackluster. And so I wasn't that excited about it. I was like, I kind of get it. I get where it's going. I get the potential, but I just didn't see it was ready yet for prime time until November of last year when ChatGPT came out. And my co-founder said, hey, we should try this. And initially I was like, another large language model test. Okay, let's go for it. But then I actually tried ChatGPT myself. And like many people, my eyes were open to the possibility. It was the first time that I had tried something and it really worked and really worked really well. And so we agreed we were going to test it. Unfortunately, my co-founder decided he was going to go on sabbatical during the holidays. And so we couldn't get right at it. But in February, we decided to build our first bot, which was designed to help connect buyers and sellers and really helping buyers find the right short list of products that would meet their requirements.
Yeah, I played around with it a little bit when you guys first brought it out, because you'll remember I when I first joined, I tried the existing helper and it didn't help much. It was actually pretty bad, but the good news is nobody used it, so I guess we didn't have to worry about that from a customer satisfaction perspective anyway. But I'm amazed at how much.
Remember, Michael, when we actually had live people behind the chat.
I do actually, yeah.
So some of our initial testers of this were those the live people that were getting those questions, they were equally impressed as we were.
Yeah, that's good, because those, in fact, some of those folks worked for me for a little while when I was there. That was, and it's interesting to see as chatbots have evolved, and you mentioned the people behind it. I know one of the things that I did a survey in a project for a client a few months ago asking about chatbots. It was about communications in general, but chatbots particularly, and around support. And when I asked people specifically about their talking to a chatbot, they didn't really want to. That if you say, "Would you rather talk to a human than a chatbot?" They're always going to say, "I'd rather talk to a human," right? And that was, I mean, that was a big percentage, like 80%. But what you see if you ask the questions a little differently was that if they're talking to more of an interactive chatbot, or if they've had good results, that nearly 50% of them said, "Oh, had good results, interacting with the chatbot recently." And I think that's a big shift in the way those things function. So I'm curious how you've implemented that and how you've managed to make it, interactive so that it does provide a good customer experience. So what are the advantages of having generative AI in the chatbot?
Well, I think you were kind of alluding to, our experiences, like, and everybody's probably had this experience where you've called up your bank or whatever, and they give three options for a prompt, and none of them meet your need. And it's just frustrating because you want to hit zero or whatever. You want to go talk to a person. And so I'm not surprised, based on your research, that
Yeah.
people don't want to use a chatbot if that's what they perceive a chatbot to be, because usually the old website based chatbots were very similar to those voice systems.
Yeah.
But the difference between an AI enabled chatbot is, I think it really puts the user in control versus
Mm.
the chatbot in control. And so you can ask the question, it will automatically answer your question from the beginning, as opposed to having to wait for a prompt or figure out if it will ever get to you. And ultimately, at the end of the whole thing, you end up having to just enter a case or something like that and wait
Yeah.
for somebody to respond to you, where you can get the answer when you need it. And that is the big difference. And the amazing thing about these AI enabled chatbots is that if you feed it the right data, it has perfect recall, or near perfect recall, and it just gives you better information than a human can, because a human would probably have to do a search or find it, the answer. They don't always know, and so they've got a database on the other side that they're looking up, and the chatbot is basically doing all that usually faster than what a human can do.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I know you'll be at Dreamforce next week, and I will too. I know one of the things that Salesforce has done, and you see this in other customer service systems too, is that not only you can use the chatbot up front, but when you get to the human, what you probably don't realize is that the chatbot now sits by the human too, because they're also using it to answer your questions, because it's much faster at finding the answers than they ever were with the old systems, right? So it's kind of funny to think, I don't want to talk to a chatbot, but that human is probably having an assisted conversation with you anyway. But it is different than the logic tree ones. I tell you, I was trying to return something to a large online retailer recently, and had a lot of frustration. And you would have laughed at me as I was yelling at my computer because it wouldn't let me return the item. And I finally got to somebody, but whew, that was not a good experience. So what are using Gen AI in the chatbot? What are challenges? What are limitations? I mean, what was hard and what worked really well?
Yeah, and I think you do have to be cautious, and right. And I don't think every application, this is just my opinion, right, is ready for a chatbot.
Mm.
And I think ones that are more sensitive, right, where you need the answer, let's say medical situations, um, you want to be a little more cautious around those. But that's a little different than trying to select the right software, for example.
Right.
And so chatbots will they will say hallucinate, right, and you'll get an answer that seems perfectly legitimate, and the chatbot gives you it with great confidence.
Oh, yeah.
But it is only as good as the data that it's provided. And if it doesn't have the data, sometimes, right, it might make some assumptions that are incorrect in the same way that a human might. It doesn't do it intentionally. It doesn't lie intentionally, but sometimes it's wrong. And so right now, I think there's good implementations or good use cases, and then there's others that probably aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I was playing around with them when I first started to use them back in December or so, and I had ChatGPT write a biography for me, and it did I'm a fairly online person. It did a pretty good job, and in fact, even gave me 2 advanced degrees from UC Davis, which was really exciting. Of course, I never went to UC Davis, but that's okay. I mean, it was a very good biography. I
You'll
was
take it.
impressed with
Yeah.
myself. Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, exactly. Um, so obviously, the one of the biggest issues with chatbots I know is data. Right. So how I mean, you're using ChatGPT in the back end of your chatbots, Monty. I should call it Monty. That's its name, right? I have one on my website. It's called Aereo. So that's, we can have them talk at some point. But how did you train? Like, obviously, the ChatGPT large language model is one piece of it, but then you've got all the site data and data in general. How do you guys think about that, and how did you train it so that it can actually respond off of the G2 site data?
Sure, sure. And so the way that I like to think about this is I like to thinking about it just in human form. And so if we were to train a chatbot whose purpose is to provide information in the same way that a sales representative might provide information about a product. But you have to train that sales rep. And the first thing that you do when you're training that sales rep is you want to gather all the product information. You want to gather its advantages, its disadvantages, its use cases, potentially some customer testimonials, and you also want to talk about the sales methodology. You would train them in a sales methodology that you want, that you subscribe to. And if you can provide all of this information in text form and have the human read it, they will consume it, and then in theory, right, they would be able to do the job. You basically do the exact same thing with the chatbot. You provided all of this text data that goes into a vector database that then you kind of then tell the chatbot how to use and recall that data. And that is exactly the same way that you might train a salesperson. So it sounds
Interesting.
It's actually much simpler than what you might think.
Yeah, I was on my show last week. I was talking to a couple folks from Pickaxe, which is a AI platform, and we were talking about prompts. And they used an analogy that I really like. They said that you have to think about the language model as a smart intern, and as a reasonably smart intern. And so when you're training them, they come to you. They have general intelligence, but they don't have specific intelligence, right? They don't know about your stuff. And so you have to train them in that, and that makes them then competent. And they sort of think of the large language model sort of the same way, which makes sense to me anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know you're using the chatbot on both ends of the marketplace, right? So one end of it is for buyers as they come in, but I'm curious about the other side of it, the seller side of it. What are you doing with that side? What kinds of things? Because both of them are customer experience issues, because obviously your customers are on both ends of that marketplace, but the monetization part of it is in the seller part. So how has that helped the experience by having that available?
Well, the way that we think about this is if we can provide a great experience for the buyers, ultimately that's going to help the sellers.
Yeah.
And so the first bot that we built was really designed to narrow the list of softwares that would meet your requirements. But then at some point, the buyer has questions that are very detailed. They have very detailed requirements, whether does it integrate to XYZ software, as a classic example. And maybe that's buried somewhere in a review that you might be able to find whether it does it or not, but you have to really search for this.
Yep.
And so if you can then enable the seller to provide more of this information to the chatbot, ultimately, right, the buyer is going to get the answers that they need faster. And if you can, as a seller, speed up the sales cycle and do that without having to interact with the buyer, so there's no labor on your end, right? You're saving money and ultimately getting much stronger leads through the process. And they'll contact you, right? If it's a good fit and you provided a great service and a great early sales experience through the bot, they want to contact you because it's going to solve the problems that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, it sounds almost like the sellers are helping train the bot and giving them more specifics around the products that they have listed. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information on G2 that the bot can be trained on, but not everything's there.
Right.
And so enabling the sellers to provide more of that information. And with a bot, especially an AI based bot, right, you can provide it a lot more information. The problem with providing a ton of information on a website or on a marketplace is the buyer has to find it,
Yeah.
and that's hard in many cases. And so you have to have a really good search, elastic search engine to be able to do that. And then you have to sift through the text. With a bot, it kind of does all that for you.
Mm. Well, and a lot of that data is not very well structured. Obviously, it's people writing reviews, so it has to be able to interpret some of that stuff too. I would imagine.
It does, and that's what's amazing about it's not just, I think, the technology of the large language models, but it's the concept of these vector databases that are enabling it as well. Which I don't claim to be an expert in vector databases, so please don't ask me any detailed
I'm just
questions
going to
about
jump in on that.
but what little I do know about it, right? It's really a big enabler for customizing the bot experience.
Well, so I know one of the biggest issues with training the the bots, training the large language model is data quality. So, how have you approached this? How do you ensure that you have good quality data for the bot to use, and that it continues to consume good quality data as it learns more?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of points there. One is, the seller, right? We enable the seller to continue to upload the most recent data, but also you mentioned the prompt strategy
Mm,
before. So um, being able to take, let's say, a recorded gong call
mm,
or a Zoom call, and being able to summarize that
mm,
call into the advantages and disadvantages, or pulling some of that data out, right, is very, very important. So often, right, you're using a large language model to actually summarize the data before you put it into the vector database.
mm.
So you're getting the right things into it versus the wrong things.
Mm. Yeah, I just added an extension to my Chrome browser the other day that's a little AI chatbot that summarizes things that you're reading. So you go in and you look at a long McKinsey blog article or something, and you're like, I don't really want to read this whole thing. Here, can you summarize this in a paragraph for me? And it does. I'm like, wow, that saved me a lot of time. I hope it gave me everything I could have gotten out of it, but time's important too, right? Yeah, that's good. So, and then from a quality perspective, have you had any issues with data quality? I mean, is there anything that you had to do extra that to make sure that the training data is accurate?
You know, um, there's several techniques that we use, and this is really post implementation.
Mm,
One is, ChatGPT uses this as well, which is basically user feedback that you can use for machine
mm,
learning. Thumbs up, thumbs down, did it answer the question? But we've also then been able to implement a prompt on top of all of the data. So every chat we analyze via this prompt that determines whether or not the user succeeded in answering the questions or not.
mm,
And so it's kind of a really fancy sentiment analysis. I wouldn't call it sentiment analysis,
mm,
but we can actually determine whether or not it was, we provided the right data
mm.
from the conversation. And then we can dig into the ones that maybe didn't succeed and, change their prompt strategy so that the next time
Mm.
it gets the answer correct,
Yes.
or add data, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I mean, it learns not only from the training data you've already put in there, then, but it's also learning from the conversations as it has them.
That's right.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So you get that iterative approach, and it just gets better the more people use it.
That's correct. Yeah,
That's cool.
definitely. Like the more conversations it has, the better it gets.
So I mean, it's exciting. I'm excited about AI and all the things that I'm investigating and researching about it. But there's also this sort of other side of it, right? And there's a lot of talk around ethics, a lot of talk around security, a lot of talk around privacy. So I I'm curious, what have you guys thought about there? What are you doing from from those to deal with those concerns, ethical, privacy, whatever those are? How have you approached that?
Yeah. I think one of our G2's mantras from the beginning has been all about transparency. We created G2 to bring more transparency to B2B buying.
Right.
And so everything we're doing with chatbots, we want to be as transparent as possible. We believe transparency builds trust. And over time, if you can gain that trust, people will ultimately have more trust in using the bots. And so when we think about transparency, it can be, there's issues of the company being transparent that you're using a bot.
Mm.
And so you want to make sure that they know. In some cases, people are actually trying to, because as you mentioned earlier, often people don't want to talk to a bot. And so if they're so good now, people may not even realize that they're talking to a bot. And some people perceive that as an advantage. Like we at G2 would stray away from that and say we want to be transparent that they're using the bot. But then on the other side, you want to be transparent about how the data is being used too, and that kind of gets into the privacy side of what you're doing. And so we will be transparent about how the data is viewing, who has access to it, etc. At the same time, we don't want to put a bunch of contracts in front of somebody that really scares people away from using the bot or makes them go through a really bad user experience. So those are a couple, and then of course there's the IP protection that you want to get into. And so that's usually the first thing that comes up when you're using a pre-trained model is, okay, what's the IP about? And you do have to read the terms. But at the same time, right, I think these companies, ChatGPT, Google, they realize that their business is highly dependent on the privacy of this and the IP protection. And so you do have to somewhat trust that they're going to be a good actor in this situation and not a bad actor.
Mm. And I mean, you're not really, for the most part, you're not collecting a lot of privacy focused data in those interactions anyway. But there is some data, I suppose, being shared there if they go all the way through to connecting to a buyer, that sort of thing. So, I mean, have you had any concerns around privacy, or have you done anything there special?
With PII in particular, right, we do not encourage nor ask for any PII in a conversation. Now, could a user put in PII without being prompted? Yes. We would do our best to try to scrub that, but it's not something that we would ask. And if a user wanted to be contacted, we would probably do that in a way that is very similar to all the privacy laws that are out there today, where we make sure they are very aware that they are opting in to be contacted.
Yeah, so I mean that's I know when we were going through privacy and GDPR and preps and that sort of thing, that was something that we looked at a lot back then. So I guess that carries over into what you're doing with the bots as well. Yeah. I mean, there's probably not a big security risk around most of this, except for the IP part. But there is also, I guess, the potential for some bias in the model. So I'm curious, have you guys looked at that at all? Is there anything you've done, and is there any risk around bias from that perspective?
Well, of course, there's risk for bias, and your prompt strategy, I think, can help mitigate that a little bit. But it will also be biased based on the data that's there. So, like anytime you do a survey or anything, there is a potential for bias based on the survey.
Yeah,
like the reviews. If we don't have an equal number of reviews that are representative of different viewpoints, different size companies, right, whatever it might be, and we're using that data to provide the responses are going to be biased as well.
That makes sense. And there's also, I guess, the risk of, you're talking about reviews. I mean, there is certainly there are some reviews that are more reactionary or maybe more negatively focused too, that could be in the mix, that people would have to understand, I guess, too.
For sure. And the G2 has a side of it that rates softwares based on the reviews that are out there. We have not tried to do any generative AI that modifies the algorithm through rating or anything like that at this point. It just uses that algorithm to present options. So we will say this product is rated XYZ on G2.
Mm. So you are pulling in the data from the other algorithms, and then it can advise based on what it gets directly off of those rating algorithms. Yeah, that makes sense too. So obviously, this is a really interesting application of the chatbot. I think because you're not, it's not directly like I have a problem kind of a thing. It's more of I'm looking for solutions and that sort of thing. So how does this, what do you think the future possibilities that we can see from these chatbots and particularly these intelligent chatbots that use generative AI? Where are we going to see them? What else do you think is going to happen around that? It's changing so quickly. It's hard to keep up,
These opinion questions, I love talking about them, but I think everybody has speculation around these. I love these are great conversations over a drink of where it could go, because there's so many options. And so how it will change society and how it even change the way we learn over time, and what we learn over time, I think are wonderful questions. If I were to think about, specifically B2B interactions, though, which is what G2 is, I think it's really changing the way probably people find and search over time. And if we compare, will it be the new Google? Will people enable enough information out there that bots basically are the complete way that you search and ultimately maybe find and buy products directly within the bot and never even go? So is it the new internet? I don't know. I can see a world where you could do everything and interact through a bot, because when you're searching the information, you're looking for information typically, and then you want to potentially transact. And so a bot, you're looking for information. Would you ultimately be able to transact as well? I don't know. Those are some things that I think about.
Yeah, because you are starting to see it sort of things are starting to merge. Like just a simple one, I noticed that G2 had put a plugin on ChatGPT Plus now, so you can actually interact just like you would if you'd gone to the G2 site, I assume, on ChatGPT. You think that's a part of what you just said, this kind of merging of all these different things that are happening?
I think so. And right now, even like the bots that we build, they're designed for a specific purpose. They're trained on a specific purpose. But when, eventually we're going to have bots that actually you just need one bot for everything. And it's smart enough to know the context of the question, and then where do you kind of go and find that information versus a plugin, right? You have to actually say, I'm going to use this plugin. Versus knowing based on the question that it should go use that plugin.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's almost like in a way you end up with this assistant bot that just helps you do all sorts of different things, I guess. So, you've jumped in. The G2 has jumped in pretty heavily into this, and I know, that there's a lot of support for automation and that sort of thing among the founders and among the executives at G2 anyway. But what would you advise? I talk to a lot of companies, and there's kind of a mixed feeling, I think, about it. Like, is it time to jump in? Should we wait? What do you think? And this is definitely another opinion question, but I'm just curious. Should companies be at least experimenting with this, or are they going to get left behind if they don't do something?
Yeah, I obviously have bias in this question. But if you're not learning about this, or if you don't have some way of learning about it and understanding how it might impact your business and how you can use it, you might be at risk, is my opinion. Now, is it the right time for you today? I don't know. So as I mentioned, there's certain industries that probably it applies more to than others. But almost every industry, I think, probably has a way to make themselves more efficient, even if they're not developing an AI product.
Mm.
There's probably a way, at least internally, you can improve your operational efficiencies using
Yeah.
it.
So I mean, it sounds like you'd say that you're probably better off at least piloting and experimenting than you are holding back at this point, because things are going to continue to evolve, and maybe you get left behind if you don't learn what you could do with it. I mean,
Yeah, at a minimum, even if you're not developing and putting development effort into it, but like looking at the tools that are out there, and they are being developed fast.
hmm,
Um, and there's more coming on every single day. And so, like, just keeping up to speed on what tools might benefit your business or certain areas of your business,
hmm.
and then testing them. A lot of these newer tools, they have free trials, and so just try them out.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of my other guests used the old Nike phrase, "Just do it." So maybe
Right.
that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe that's the right answer, right? Well, we're just at the end of time. Great conversation. Always fun to chat with you, Tim. I really appreciate you joining. Before I let you go, though, could you recommend someone, a thought leader, an author, some mentor that's influenced your career, help you develop and evolve?
Well, what's coming to mind when you say this right now, and I wouldn't call it a mentor or anything like that, but maybe somebody that I've been inspired by as I've been thinking about AI is this. It's a woman named Dorothea Vaughn.
Mm,
Dorothea Vaughn was she was a programmer, head of human computing for NASA. And when I
mm,
say human computing, that means she was like ran a group of people that were running mathematical thing on paper, and she sees next door, right, that they're installing the first IBM mainframe to basically take her and all of her team's job away.
yeah.
And so, immediately many people they react with fear and they want to sabotage. They don't want to like embrace the change. But her reaction was different. Her reaction was she goes to the library, she checks out all the books on Fortran, she makes a copy of the manual and trains her entire team on
Yeah.
it. And so when I'm thinking about AI, like I get inspiration from what she did, which was not react with fear, but react with like all we can do is learn and just go after the learning. And so I think about Dorothea Vaughn,
Mm.
just recently.
Yeah, I love that story, and I think that's probably one of the things that can really help people understand, especially when you talk about the threat to jobs. And we know there are going to be some jobs that go away or change or automated away, whatever. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be embracing this and learning, because the more you learn, the more opportunity you're going to have. And yeah, that's great. Thank you for that's a very good story, and I love that story. Used that a few times myself, actually. Um, so that's all the time we have. But thanks everyone for joining us this week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And for more on AI, you can check out the Arion Research report that we published in August on AI adoption. It's a free download on the site, and you can't beat free downloads. So go check that out. And join us next week. I'm going to do a special edition of Dreamforce, and I have three of the executives in Salesforce AI Cloud world that are going to sit down with us for a few minutes and chat about some of the things that they're doing. So I think it's going to be a really interesting episode. Looking forward to the conversation next week. I know we're going to learn a lot about what they're doing, since certainly Salesforce has gone all in on the AI storyline. And that's it. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.